The current political climate around the globe and the intensifying conflict in the Middle East has many concerned with how we can rebuild diplomatic relations and find a way forward for peace. Joining me now is human rights activist, scholar, and the great-grandson of the great Nelson Mandela, Dr. Siyabulela Mandela. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Tommy, for welcoming us, and thank you to your viewers at home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to start with the tour that you are in town for, the Building Bridges tour. Tell us about that and why choose Canada to do this?
Well, we are engaged on the Building Bridges tour, which came as a result of the understanding that the world that we find ourselves in today is becoming even more divided than it was before. So we thought that it is of critical importance to engage communities, because if we are to arrive at an area or at a place where communities are reconciled, communities are reconnected, where there is cultivation and consolidation of peace and the protection of the fundamental values of humanity, which is human rights, community must be at the center of that. So it is within this context that we opted to engage communities in pursuit of building bridges, in pursuit of reconciling the society. It is within this context that we decided to start in Canada, because much of what is currently happening in the world is probably led largely by the global north, United States being one of those countries. And for the longest of time, we have placed the U.S. as a model and as a country that provides the direction on where the world should go. And I think now we are at crossroad as a world where we should define for ourselves and not wait for others to define for what we should do. It is within this context that then Canada becomes of critical importance. And in this conversation, we were not only reflecting on the history of mankind in general, insofar or as all the different forms of injustices that have happened, but we have also looked at ways in which we were able to overcome much of the challenges of the past. And this is where it brings us to Canada. So we're living in a world here where we are characterized by a vicious cycle of conflicts, violence, human rights violation. And here we are reminding the Canadians that they have always been at the forefront of human development insofar as advancing the fundamental values that govern society today, the values of human rights. Here we're talking about the great Canadians such as John Peters Humphrey of Hampton, who was one of the key leading authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed in December 1945. So we're reminding the Canadians of what they have always been insofar as what is the identity of the Canadian community, and how at this current juncture where the world is at crossroad, we need countries such as Canada to provide the direction. I mean, it was Prime Minister Brian Mulroney who played a key significant role in mobilizing the Commonwealth to sanction apartheid South Africa in pursuit of justice, freedom, and the liberation of the oppressed people in South Africa. This is to say, again, it was once again Canada that was at the forefront of advancing and protecting the fundamental values that we hold dear today.
Now, we also here in Canada have our history too, and we have started on the journey of truth and reconciliation here on Canadian soil. It's been slow in progress, and we know that that journey in South Africa, your great-grandfather was a catalyst for that, Nelson Mandela. What would you say to a country that is dealing with that, coming to terms with the truth and that history, but moving along slowly, slower than what a lot of people thought and what Indigenous people here in Canada would want?
I would argue and say one of the, whilst the world celebrate the successes of the truth and reconciliation in South Africa, there are a lot of fault lines that to be found on how we have implemented the truth and reconciliation as a means to bring together and build bridges between our own community, and particularly advance the idea that Mandela and his generation, the likes of Desmond Tutu, had insofar as being in search of a society that is defined on the basis of diversity, and how embracing one another, embracing our differences is actually a strength more than it is a threat. The argument here is to say the Truth and Reconciliation ought to be understood as not as a destination, it is a journey. This is the mistake that South Africa had, an assumption that they can undo in 5 years what took 100 years, the oppression of 100 years. It is a journey that we should see the Truth and Reconciliation as a journey, something that we do on a day-to-day basis. If you consider the Indian Act of 1884, it took more than 100 years to inflict the injustices that were inflicted against the indigenous people here. So to expect that, therefore, within a period of 5 or 10 years, you'll be able to undo that, that's where the problem is. So in my point of view, it is a misconception to expect that you can undo 100 years of oppression in a space of 5 years. So that is why then most of the time the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission suggests that there has to be a fundamental change and transformation into the structures that govern society. And what that means is that there has to be a practical expression of what we mean by reconciliation. We reconcile from what?
Right.
The recognition of the injustice of the past suggests that we should therefore engage in a journey that seeks to rebuild and bring about a redress to the injustices of the past. I'll give you a typical example.
Forward.
I've done a lot of work across, I've been traveling to Canada for about 10 years, and I've done a lot of work with the indigenous communities. The realities of the material conditions of the indigenous people here in Canada are very striking. If you go to indigenous schools, the schools are incapacitated. Indigenous schools don't have access to basic services such as libraries, such as water. That is a major problem. So if you look at the legacy of the residential school system and the impact it has had to the indigenous communities, it surprises me that then there is no practical expression and the redress of what we mean by truth and reconciliation. I would assume that at this, in 2026, that the indigenous kids are given some form of a compensation. When we say compensation, we are talking about maybe free education for the poor and free education for the indigenous communities,
right,
as a way to bring about a redress to the injustices that the residential school system had. In South Africa, we had that. We have free education for the poor, which is the realization that much of the injustices were leveled against the masses of black and poor individuals within our country. So the practical expression of reconciliation suggests that then we should find ways to bring about building the bridges between communities, and the way in which we recognize those injustices is to say, in terms of reparations, we will intentionally and deliberately target that particular group as an attempt to bring about the reparation and healing for the injustices that have happened throughout time.
And that's part of your tour as well,
Precisely.
the Building Bridges tour, and what you're doing here in Canada. And we do appreciate you coming here to the country.
Thank you, Tammy.
And spreading your message and that message of building bridges and coming together throughout Canada. And here in Toronto, you're going to be having events here in Toronto tonight with West Hall, as well as the Boys and Girls Club on Saturday. So we appreciate your time, Dr. Mandela.
Thank you, Tammy.
Truly do. All
Thank
right.
you,
Thank
Tammy.
you so much.
Appreciate it.
Right